This podcast does not provide medical advice nor legal advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast where we talk about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement. I'm Marianne Matzo, a nurse practitioner, and I use my experience from working as a nurse for 45 years to help answer your questions about what happens at the end of life.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete, an actor in New York City, and here to ask the questions that you may have while listening to our podcast. We are both here because we believe that the more you know, the better prepared you will be to make difficult decisions when a crisis hits, such as having a healthcare proxy form. It may be called something different in your state or country, and someone who will defend your wishes when you can't speak for yourself.
Please relax and get yourself something to eat and drink. And thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me as we talk about the deadly fungi that's rearing its head across the world. Actually, it's very serious, Charlie.
Yeah,
so
I know.
Don't make jokes.
Okay, no, I won't make jokes.
In the first half, Charlie's having a Tupperware party with medieval. In the first half, Charlie is having a Tupperware party with medieval Europeans, and I have the recipe of the week. In the second half, I have information about a deadly fungal infection that is rapidly spreading in U.S. healthcare facilities. And in our third half, Charlie has a journal entry from Craig, whose wife has dementia and lives in a memory care setting. Now, given our topic this week is about a deadly fungus, we just had to have a fungus-inspired recipe for you to take to your next funeral lunch. Our recipe, Tibetan fried rice, features two different fungi, wood ear fungus and shiitake mushrooms. Fast and simple to make, but oh so good. Charlie, do you have any Tupperware I can use to store my Tibetan fried rice?
No, but I do have the next best thing. If you were in the 17th century. As you can imagine, medieval Europeans did not have plastic containers. Instead, they had pastry coffins. It's like a sort of medieval Tupperware, but these containers called coffins, and at that time spelled with a Y, so Coffyn, were actually very stiff, hollow pastries made from water, flour, and sometimes fat. And they were used to preserve foods. The coffin/container itself was not eaten. I mean, really, would you want to eat Tupperware? During the 17th century, these coffins contained delicious foods rather than a dead body. The English loved pastries and had a saying, "If it's good, 'tis better in a coffin." Oh, those wacky Brits. So, chefs of medieval times used a glutinous dough container to seal and preserve various foods. One of the most popular delicacies was lamprey, an eel-like fish with spiraling teeth. You might recognize these fish as they're well known now for their appearance in many horror movies. But back in the day, lampreys were considered meals fit for kings and queens. Chefs would season the fish with everything from parsley and mint to ginger and cinnamon. Then they would seal the lamprey inside of a pastry coffin to cook. Once cooked, coffin lids could be removed or cut into, and the interior juices were sometimes further cooked with wine or vinegar. Occasionally, frogs or birds would be hidden inside the pastry containers to get a laugh from the unsuspecting dinner guests. Once, a very small person was served to King Charles I, which involved him charging through the coffin's crust, dressed in a tiny suit of armor. Ultimately, coffin containers made their way for the sweet, flaky, and edible pie crusts we know today. So a tip of the old baker's hat to the pastry coffin, with a Y, of the past.
Huh.
Yeah, I stumbled upon this, and it's like, wait a minute, a container made of, but that was the thing. It was just, with ingredients, there was nothing to eat. It was just something that became a container. That was it. That was the container of its day.
I can't believe they put a person in one of them.
Yeah, apparently, you can make them different sizes, but I mean, they were pretty big. It was, I was going to say the refrigerator would stay, but there was no refrigeration. It was a storage bin for food. And again, it was big enough that they would put a ton of food in it, and then just it was their food storage locker. But again, big enough to put one of the little people in dressed in a knight's armor. Yes.
Not politically correct anymore. Couldn't get away with that, Charles.
No, you can't. Well, but if you were... No, never mind. So, please go to our webpage for the recipe for Tibetan fried rice and additional resources for this program. We ask you to support in the form of a tax-deductible contribution so that we can continue to offer you quality programming. Thank you in advance for going to our website to make your donation, as well as following us on Facebook and Instagram. Visit us at www.everyonedies.org. That's guys.org. Marianne?
Thanks for that, Charlie. I don't know if you've been following in the paper, but there's a lethal, hard-to-treat fungal infection that's spreading really across the world, but is also very bad in the United States and becoming increasingly resistant to the few drugs available to treat it. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, otherwise known as the CDC, is tracking the rise of a deadly treatment-resistant fungus that causes outbreaks in a growing number of healthcare facilities across the United States. About 30 to 60% of infected people have died from the fungus. It's identified through testing body fluids, and it has alarmed the CDC because it's more difficult to distinguish from other yeasts and may be misdiagnosed, making it harder to contain. Now, new data compiled by the CDC research team published in the Annals of Internal Medicine showed that Candida auris infections have increased dramatically in the United States in recent years. In 2021, national cases reported by healthcare facilities increased by 95%. And from 2019 to 2021, 17 states reported their first case. With infections recorded in a total of 28 states and the District of Columbia, these numbers suggest that the current disinfection and safety measures at healthcare facilities may not be sufficient. Most fungi play a vital but unseen role breaking down plant matter and redistributing nutrients through the soil. Some are good to eat, like yeast, for example, are integral to creating bread, beer, and other foods that have shaped societies and cultures over many centuries. Scientists believe that the fungus is not a threat to healthy people whose immune systems can fight it off, but it poses a danger to medically fragile people, including nursing home patients on ventilators and cancer patients on chemotherapy. Between 30 to 70% of hospitalized people who develop these bloodstream infections are estimated to die. And I can remember having a patient who was on chemotherapy, and we tell people don't go digging in the soil, don't be doing things like that because there are fungus among us. And he did. He went and gardened, got this fungal infection, was in isolation. The doctors tried for months to treat this man. And he was in isolation for months and just kept losing weight and eventually died. So these are, if you're immunocompromised, these are deadly fungi. Now, if you watch the HBO series The Last of Us, you might be thinking the story is another episode of that show. In that show, a fungus violently infects humans and causes a global pandemic, which sends society into a tailspin. If we put aside the gore, violence, and the downfall of human civilization, the show's premise of a deadly fungal infection that kills people, scientists say that the show highlights legitimate vulnerabilities. In a warmer world, fungal infections in people could increase and spread faster than treatments can be developed. Fungi are mushrooms, yeast, lichen, or sometimes even athlete's foot. They appear like plants, but they don't make their own food. They can gain energy and nutrients by feeding on living hosts, decomposing dead organic matter, or by living harmlessly with other organisms. Now, most fungi don't infect people because they can't withstand our warm body temperatures or immune system. Between 1.5 and 5 million fungi species may exist in the world, but only a few hundred can make people sick, mostly immunocompromised people who don't have a full-strength immune system to fight them off. Johns Hopkins infectious disease researcher Arturo Casadeva says that fungi will adapt to warmer climates by developing greater heat tolerance. Some will then be able to grow at human temperatures and cause new fungal diseases that we have not seen before. New fungi are already appearing in unexpected places. One fungus, called Candida auris, which causes serious infections in the bloodstream, simultaneously emerged on different continents. These strains of the fungus are also drug-resistant, making them harder to treat. Casadeva published a paper comparing the temperature susceptibility of Candida auris with those of its close relatives, suggesting that it could be the first example of a new fungal disease emerging from modern-day climate change. The emergence of Candida auris in 3 continents almost simultaneously has researchers theorizing that warming global climate may have contributed to its rise. Whether further global temperature increases lead to more dangerous fungal superbugs remains to be seen. Fungi, even those that aren't drug-resistant, are challenging to treat, says physician Julia Kohler. That's because humans and fungi share many genes because both evolved from a common ancestor. In fact, fungi are more closely related to animals than they are to plants or bacteria. As a result, a drug that would target a fungus in our bodies could also destroy our surrounding cells. Now, it doesn't take much for a fungus to spread because they move through air currents or they can be transported by people or animals. Most fungal infections, both mild and serious, are caused by one of the 100 types of Candida yeasts. Some types of Candida live peacefully within our bodies, like a yeast infection is simply an overgrowth of one of these helpful species. Now, a short science moment. I'm going to talk to you about colonization. Colonization means that the germs, fungi, are present on or in a person's body and are alive and growing. Colonization can increase a person's risk for infection. Also, people who are colonized can unknowingly spread these germs to others through person-to-person contact or contaminated surfaces in shared settings. You can be colonized without an infection. So, back to our story. Candida auris is one of the more dangerous types of fungi, but for most healthy people, the fungus will temporarily colonize the skin without causing any illness or issues. Without testing, you'd likely never even know it was there. This type of colonization often resolves naturally thanks to existing fungi in the normal skin flora that eventually rebalances and takes over. The danger arises when Candida auris finds a way into the body through a wound or another opening, particularly if somebody is weakened or immunocompromised. Candida auris is resistant to fungal medication, which makes it unique among fungi. If you look across all species of Candida, only about 7% of all isolates, which are the individual cell samples that are trapped and grown in a lab, are resistant to antifungals, says Sean Lockhart, who's the director of the CDC Fungal Reference Laboratory. Now, all of a sudden, we've got this bug where 85 to 90% of all isolates are resistant. Generally, a drug-resistant fungus can evade one of the 3 major types of antifungal medications. But C. aureus is pan-resistant, which means that all 3 treatments are weakened or ineffective against it. C. aureus also has an unusual ability to stick around, like literally. The fungus is able to form biofilms, which is essentially like having a suit of armor that allows it to stay in the environment. It makes it super sticky to surfaces, and it can resist disinfectant. The stickiness allows C. aureus to cling to medical equipment like ventilators and catheters in a way that other infectious agents can't. Invasive fungal infections kill 3 times more people than malaria. Only a new fungi can cause fatal diseases in healthy people, and these are generally rare and occur only in certain geographic regions such as South America. But of greater concerns are infections of normally harmless fungi that can occur in those with weakened immune systems. For example, modern immunosuppressive drugs used for organ transplants or treating HIV/AIDS have seen a huge increase in the number of people infected. These fungal infections can be lethal, with a mortality rate often exceeding 50%. Recent statistics suggest that at least 1.6 million people die every year as a result, roughly equivalent to the number of deaths from tuberculosis worldwide. These infections are like sepsis, where the fungus gets into the blood and organs, preventing the blood in the organs from working properly. But what really makes Candida aureus stand out is its ability to grow at higher temperatures. It's able to withstand up to 107.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So, how do you know if you have a Candida aureus infection? It can spread in hospitals and nursing homes. C. aureus has caused outbreaks in healthcare facilities and can spread through contact with affected patients and contaminated surfaces or equipment. Good hand hygiene and cleaning in healthcare facilities is important because C. aureus can live on surfaces for several weeks. People who get invasive Candida infections are often already sick from other medical conditions, so it can be difficult to know if you have C. aureus infection. The most common symptoms of invasive Candida infection are fever and chills that don't improve after an antibiotic treatment for a suspected bacterial infection. Only a laboratory test can diagnose C. aureus infection. Be sure that you talk to your primary healthcare practitioner if you think you have a fungal or healthcare-associated infection. So what can you do to prevent getting fungal skin infections? Well, good hygiene practices can help reduce the risk if you're getting a fungal infection and can stop it from recurring. Keep your skin clean and dry. Wear clean clothes. Don't share personal items like bedsheet, clothes, or towels. Wash your hands. And take extra care when you're in communal areas. Although fungal infections are unlikely to cause a worldwide pandemic or a zombie apocalypse, there's still reason to be concerned. Fungi have been responsible for some of the biggest extinction events in plants and animals. So this is something that's new, Charlie, and for people that are already sick, it can be the final event before death.
The final frontier, yeah.
Do you have any questions about that? Have you been following this story?
I have been following this, Marianne. Obviously not closely enough, and it was, it's just my own biases. I kept hearing, nursing home facilities, like, well, it's got nothing to do with me, which is really stupid thinking. Talk about a Stephen King novel. This is, and I understand what you're saying. It's like, more for, people who are, autoimmune. But as I kept hearing everything with what you were saying, I just kept thinking, okay, so when is it going to jump just into regular society? And then everything with the climate changing and what you were saying about things getting warm, the temperature getting warmer, and that just, makes this thing stronger. I mean, I am, really good about washing my hands, and I always have like a couple of either like little alcohol pads or a little sanitizing bottle with me. But I've gotten lazy too sometimes, and it's just scary as shit to be hearing all of this. It's like, gosh.
Well, it doesn't have to rule our lives, but I thought it was an important story to talk about with our listeners, because if you're caring for people who are sick,
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And you go out to the grocery store and you bring all that stuff home and you don't think about, I need to wash my hands. And, I need to be aware of what I'm bringing back in.
Right.
And if 50% of the people who are immunocompromised if they get this disease, if they get this fungus, they're going to die, then I think it's worthwhile to know about and to be aware of and wash your hands and take some precautions about it.
Absolutely. And I think, too, unfortunately, so many people, denying things like COVID. I'm sorry. I just imagine so many people not even going to bother with this, or just say, it's another conspiracy. It's another this. This is not going to affect me. And keep their guards down. And
I guess I guess that's personal choice, but I think it was Everyone Dies personal choice to say, hey, just want you to know about this. Be careful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you heed us, just like with an advance directive or anything else, that's a good idea. And if you don't, then that's up to you.
Yeah. It's up to you until, the zombie world materializes and it starts to jump to people from one person to another. You need to really stop watching these movies. Okay. So thank you. Okay, always good talking with you, Marianne. So moving on to our third half, we have, as Marianne mentioned earlier, we have another of a series of journal entries from Greg, whose wife of 50 years has dementia and lives in a memory care center. I often enjoy the soft music on the Coffee House channel on Sirius Radio. There is a song by Meg Smith that says, I used to be painfully pessimistic, and now I am cautiously optimistic. The lyrics don't match my life, but that phrase does. As I pondered it, I thought that I needed to add some more stages of my caregiver life. I was blissfully ignorant, completely confused, painfully pessimistic, reverently resigned, and finally, cautiously optimistic. I'm sure you can add some others, but I am blessed to be cautiously optimistic. Not about the final outcome. There I am reverently resigned. I have graduated to cautiously optimistic about my future when we finish this journey. I will be brokenhearted, to put it mildly, but I now know, after several months of self-care, that I can live alone and yet be reasonably happy. I have given myself permission to live in harmony with my life journey. That was a huge transition. Yeah.
And how many people really live in harmony with their life journey? There's so many things that are thrown at us, and, we resist and we fight against them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's tough to do. People just, get caught up in their discomfort and and with this gentleman, just, it's pain and everything with it. And it's hard to look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So with that, please stay tuned for the continuing saga of Everyone Dies. And thank you for listening. Sand through an hourglass never runs dry. This is Charlie Navarrete. And from the pages of the Guardian newspaper, Karl Marx's grave is just another communist plot. Isn't that great? I love that. It's great.
Isn't it nice that we just make ourselves laugh?
Yes,
Other people are probably rolling their eyes all around the world, but we just chuckle. And I'm Marianne Matzo, and we'll see you next week. Remember, every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion, are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.